Oh, here we go. Here we go. Here we go.
Here we go.
Here we go.
Here we go.
Here we go. Here we go.
Oh, here we
Here we
go.
go.
Oh, here we go.
Welcome back to the motherfucking podcast, guys.
Hello,
I'm Lacey.
I'm Stephanie.
And this is Here We Go.
The enthusiasm was a little, I don't know.
I was taking a more grounded approach.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm like, all right, damn. Okay.
We're diving into drugs today.
Yeah, so, and it's one of our favorite topics, and that's psychedelics. So we have always wanted to find a guest to bring on that facilitated MDMA or psychedelic therapy with people. And we've always wanted a guest like this, like I said, and never ever thought we would find one in Arkansas. Literally the last place I thought I would be connected with someone. But yeah, we brought on Reed Ballantyne, who facilitates that through ketamine, cannabis.
I have
you'll
a whole
see.
bio that I
Let's
want
read
to
his bio.
Yeah. Okay. Reed is a licensed clinical social worker with Masters of Social Work and a Bachelor's in Philosophy and Religious Studies from the University of Little Rock. Reed began practicing yoga and meditation nearly 15 years ago after experiencing transformative growth aided by the use of psychedelic substances. His internal investigation led him to pursue a career in mental health in the hopes that he could help facilitate change for other individuals, groups, and communities through the integration of Eastern, Western, and shamanic healing practices.
Yes. And there was, I really like that intro. And then there's another one that is on maps.org. Wait, is that the one you just read?
He has a lot of websites about him.
Yeah, he's amazing. Just look him up. But yeah, he is literally exactly what we were looking for. And, we have a personal thing with this just because we're both from Arkansas, and we both mutually see how a lot of people need it there and would benefit from that. And even though it is happening kind of underground and everything, we just kind of talk about the benefits of on the therapy side of it and like the hopes for future plans with it and everything like that. And yeah, it's just,
I've never done a guided plant medicine, any kind of ceremony. Like, I really want to try ayahuasca, but even just like mushrooms, I would like to know what it's like to have a guide, walking me through something with it being a little bit more intentional, because you can get a little lost, but sometimes it's fun to get lost. Like, I think like I trust myself enough to just do it myself, but I'm interested to know what that's like. But speaking of Arkansas, I just recently visited Arkansas for 2 weeks, and I have such a deeper appreciation for Arkansas. It's actually like the South is pretty, but I visited in the summertime and it's just hot as fuck. And I mean, this is just a little side note. It just feels unfair that it feels like you don't want to be outside. Like, you do not want to be outside. You're like, when can I get back inside? It's just because nature's amazing.
Yeah.
But one thing we talked about in the episode is food and how nutrition and having a good like relationship with food and exercise and balance and X, Y, and Z is really important for your mental health. And something that I noticed while I was home in Arkansas, and I've known this, there's so many limitations around getting good food. I felt like I just wasn't getting the proper nutrients from food. Like, everywhere you go, it's just like fried meat, dairy, cheese. And I don't necessarily frown upon those specific items, but if it's not like ethically sourced, that's where I'm like, not fucking thank you. Like, and I just felt so much, I was just not angry, but I just feel like it's
frustrated.
Not fair. Like, it is not fair to the people down there. It's not fair to my family. Like, there's little to no education around like the reason why you need proper nutrients and whole foods and organic things. Like, and I mentioned that Arkansas is the place for agriculture, and like that state has the least amount of options for good food, and it just sucks. I'm just like, fuck you, government. Like, in so many different ways. Like, and I noticed I was texting you about it. Like I was having like triggering thoughts about my body because I don't know, maybe I struggled with an eating disorder when I lived there, when I grew up there. I was in high school, and I had a moment where I was thinking to myself that there's many reasons why this developed. But I was thinking maybe, you know, going out to restaurants, I knew that I was going to get a meal that was not good for me. It was not healthy for me. It made me feel like shit. And so as a young teenage girl, I decided that, oh, that just food is bad for me and I don't want to eat it because it makes me feel bad. It makes me gain weight. And there's just like this huge separation. It's like I was never taught like to have a relationship with healthy food because it wasn't accessible to me.
Right. Well, and that's what I was also talking about in the episode. Like growing up, especially in those areas, you are so used to being fed meat and dairy and foods that really slow you down and make you feel sluggish and things that are high in like oil and fried. And you're just so used to that growing up that food, it's normal for food to make you tired. Mm-hmm. And when you are finally eating healthy, you realize, oh, and then like if you go into like a stint where like one day you don't and then you feel tired again, like it's your body's way of telling you like, this is not what I want. Food should not make you tired. Mm-hmm. It should be energy. Like you shouldn't be like wanting to pass out or go into a nap or anything like that. That's just, but a lot of people are so used to that slowness and that feeling that way. And you don't even know that you're in it until you're out. And,
right. There's a lot of health problems, diseases where like they're not even just like weight, but there's so many health problems. And the first thing people look at isn't food when it should be. Like, what are you ingesting every day to cause this? They just go straight to the doctor and get on some kind of medicine, which has its own side effects. And it's just this like, I'm tired of the government. Like, I'm just fucking sick of it because we're just little guinea pigs. Like, truly, they don't give a fuck about us. Yeah. And for those of you who say they do, they fucking don't.
No, they
From like our education system to our fucking rights just being stripped from us, from like the food. Gun control of food, the air we breathe. It blows my mind that
I just don't get it, because I feel like if you were like a ruler, quote unquote, whatever, you would want your people to be the strongest, healthiest, smartest society. Like you would want everybody to be ingesting the healthiest knowledge, everything. So I'm just like, we're all looking real bad right now.
Well, I mean, for the people in power, if you enable people to empower themselves, if you enable people to find the power within themselves, to be the healthiest and the smartest and the most educated, they would then rise a threat to the people in power, because we're now smarter and stronger and more equipped. And so they want to keep us dumb. They want to keep us stupid. They want to keep us in fear.
It's just crazy because, like, people that are, again, quote unquote, ruling should be the smartest and the healthiest and the most progressive and like the better, the more someone that you would look up to.
People in power are in positions like that because they want power.
Yeah.
People that should be in power are not in power because they don't give a shit about power.
That's so true. Yeah.
Like I was talking about this with Cameron. Like we think both of our dads are just stand-up guys, and they're just the man. Like they're just so nice, wise, giving, like understanding. And it's like people like that you want to see in power. It's people like that have great integrity and should be president, but people like that don't want power. And so that's why it's just a lot of people in power are just corrupt, because that's the type of person who wants it.
Yeah. Damn, that's true. I don't know how to even tie that back into
Psychedelics will help solve that.
We did talk about how one of the biggest things I've taken away from psychedelics is empathy, and I was not raised to have that. I've even talked to my mom about it now, and she's like, I think about that all the time, how we didn't really teach empathy or a lot of things. Therapy was looked down on. She's like, I regret that so much. And psychedelics is the first, that is what allowed me to see how my actions affect other people. And empathy is still something that I practice all the time. I think everybody does. And we talk about how humans are you're not just born with it. Like, you have to be taught empathy. You have to instill it in your children. And if you yourself don't even understand it, then chances are you're not even really doing that. And you either live your whole life pretty much without it, or you're in a situation where you're taught it from those around you. And it's usually a really hard life lesson that you've already caused so much destruction and damage along the way to achieve it. And so my biggest thank you to psychedelics was being able to learn that and like be aware enough to practice it. And like we said in the episode, I think that a lot of people in conservative areas would really benefit from being taught empathy. But yeah.
Oh, we also talked about conservative areas would do good with just a good fuck.
Yeah,
like just
good
to
sex. Learn what good sex is like.
Yeah.
That would be nice for everybody too.
I would have put my money on it, but to hear that like on Pornhub the kinkiest shit is coming from the South and conservative areas, and I'm like, that is from that fucking religious suppression.
Yeah.
Like, it is.
Yeah, I'm so glad that I'm out of that. But yeah.
Oh, forgive me, Lord. The devil made me do it.
We watched Eat, Sleep, Pray or whatever with the Lutherans or something. That we should watch that. That's what I want to watch with you, because we should get someone from that on the show. But anyway, that shit is crazy. If you haven't watched it yet, please watch it. You're gonna like, especially if you're from the South. Anyway, but let's hop into the episode. It's a long one, super informative, and yeah.
Without further ado,
here we go.
And now for a quick commercial break with the one and only Jimbo and Jules.
Yeah, one of our favorite sponsors. So
okay, I know we've mentioned this before, but now I want to touch and highlight this product this week. It's the Bee Buzzin' Relief Salve. Anytime I'm working on the computer or even in these interviews, I don't know if you ever watch our interviews, but I cannot stop moving because I get so uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. My shoulders hurt so damn bad. And I
noticed that this past time.
Yeah, like my shoulders hurt so much. And I never get massages. But this relief salve is really nice. Like, I put it on during the interview and my shoulders feel immensely better.
Yeah, I love that it's like one of those that you can get like an immediate effect almost.
Yeah. It's 400 milligrams of full spectrum hemp. And, we've touched on this before. One of the reasons we love Jimbo and Jules is I don't know if it's organic, but it's holistically sustainable. All of their packaging is sustainable. And one thing that I really love is every purchase supports the Conscious Garden Project, which is an initiative to restore biodiversity and protect pollinators. Jimbo, the founder, had Lyme disease and cured himself with bee venom therapy. And so this is one of his ways to give back to the bees, which I think is really nice.
Yeah. We love his entire message, and that's just like every product we love. Mm-hmm. Like, everything I haven't been disappointed in anything, and we think that you guys should try it out, especially if you're really interested in holistic approaches to whatever it is that you want to work on, and or whatever you're going through. And yeah, check out Jimbo and Jules, and while you're in the cart, you can type in, here we go, 20 for 20% off. So
yay.
Just trying to help you out. So
and on that note, let's hop into the episode.
Yeah, bye.
Welcome back, guys.
Hi.
Today we are on with Reed Ballantyne. Reed, can you introduce yourself and what you do?
Yes, absolutely. I'm a licensed clinical social worker in private practice in Little Rock, Arkansas. So I provide traditional psychotherapy for individuals and people in relationships, and also provide psychedelic therapy, which I'm hoping we'll talk about a little bit today.
Oh, we want to dive in, baby.
Obviously, that's the space that Lacey and I are in. We have found it to completely change our lives in every aspect. And, but I find that it's odd that you are we have dreamed of a guest like you and did not ever think that we would find the dream guest in Little Rock, Arkansas. So,
Well, I dreamed of meeting somebody in Little Rock, Arkansas that was into psychedelics and mental health and holistic health, and I didn't find anybody, so I had to become that person. But I am glad to say that there are more and more people in my community who are getting interested and are believing in the potential for individual and collective healing through the use of psychedelics.
how did you get into this space? How did you get into this space?
Well, like most mental health therapists, I started off as a patient, and really even before I became a patient of mental health therapy, I was just desperately looking for any way to fight my way out of depression. I started using drugs and alcohol when I was about 13 to try to find some relief from anxiety and depression, and by the age of 17, 18 years old, I had really, I'd gotten to the literal and figurative end of a rope. I was willing to try anything and just wanted some sort of break from the kind of the heavy enclosure that depression had created for me. So when friends told me to give LSD a try, I figured it couldn't be any worse than some of the other things that I'd put in my body. Little did I know at the time that I would have essentially a life-changing initiation into a whole world of wonder and mystery that I didn't believe existed. So, yeah, and that was not in a therapeutic session. It was really not in a setting that I would encourage anyone to try. I actually had decided that the best way to do LSD would be to scare myself as badly as possible and to confront that fear. So I made up a playlist based mostly on 3 6 Mafia and Wu-Tang Clan. It was a bunch of really uber violent rap tracks. It was all death and murder. And I decided that would get me into contact with this fear that I had been essentially running from my whole life. And it certainly did. I look back now, having gone through a few years of training as a psychedelic therapist, and I did exactly what we tell people not to do. People in the psychedelic medicine community will tell you, if you're going to take a psychedelic, don't go in it with the intention of exploring pain, suffering, really evil and darkness in a sort of untempered way. But that's exactly what I did. And through a wild night, mostly alone, walking through the woods, I came in contact not only with fear and death and disgust and all those painful emotions I'd been running from my whole life, but I also found a source of inner strength, of courage, of what I now call love that I never knew I was in contact with. So that really just poked a hole sort of in the veil of darkness that my reality had been consumed by, and allowed me to start to wonder again about the possibilities for a life that wasn't defined by fear, sadness, loneliness.
Wow.
Wow, that was really beautiful.
Yeah.
Were you
Thank you.
were you a licensed clinical social worker before psychedelics came into your life?
No, to be completely blunt, after my first initial contact with the psychedelic space, um, like many others, I decided that this was it, that I was going to commit my life to trying to create an outlet for other people to find healing and growth in the way that I had. So I explored getting into yoga, massage therapy, other routes. I got into martial arts. I was trying to find ways to sort of access this space that were legitimate and legal and would allow me to sort of usher people into the psychedelic world. Ultimately, I discovered that social work and counseling were a route. I discovered the research of MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies, and saw that MDMA was being used in research to treat PTSD. So that was a light bulb moment for me. The possibility of legally working with psychedelics, of introducing them to the general public in a legitimate, medically and science-backed approach, really set me on fire. So I made it my goal to become a licensed clinical social worker with the really sole intent of being a psychedelic therapist. I really didn't know much about therapy at the time. I didn't know if I would even enjoy being a therapist. That really came only after I got into the work of being an LCSW.
Was it hard to being in the South? Because was it hard to achieve this in Arkansas? Like this, the interest in the interest with psychedelics and incorporating it into therapy.
Yeah, in the beginning, I felt like I was part of some like secret underground, like rebel space force, that had to like slip past the guards and bring this awesome new tool to the public. And I really didn't think I could talk to anyone about it. I remember being in the 2 years I spent in my master's program for social work. I don't know if I told a single person in my class what my ultimate goals were, because I didn't know there was a community here that might be interested, and I really thought that it would lead me to getting sort of ousted from the therapy community. So I wanted to really establish myself as a legitimate psychotherapist before even hinting at this idea of incorporating psychedelics. So it's taken me, it's been 7 years since I graduated. It's taken me most of that to even find other people in the psychotherapy community who are willing to talk about their own experiences favorably, let alone talk about using these substances in the context of their work.
I think at this point, I would only want to work with a therapist that has done that or that is in that space, or because at this point, with LSD or psychedelics in general, you are opening up a different part of your mind. And if I'm literally paying someone to understand or explain all the parts of your mind, I want to know that they're doing all they can to like learn and keep educating themselves in that space. And I feel like psychedelics gives you that. If I talk to a therapist and they're like against that or haven't done that or just not even open to talking about it at all, I'm just like, I don't even trust you at this point. So yeah.
Absolutely. I work with a lot of other vulnerable minority communities. I work with people who are in the BDSM and kink world. Those are, or who are LGBTQ identified. And it's generally accepted by psychotherapists that these are important aspects of a person's identity that you need to have some familiarity with, some education on, if you're going to support someone in psychotherapy. And I would say the same about psychedelic use. If you are wanting to support someone who's had a powerful experience with psychedelics, and most people who've taken psychedelics report it being one of the most powerful and important experiences of their life. If you're not able to speak to that from some sort of personal familiarity, if you haven't done the work of educating yourself, of grounding yourself in the knowledge base around this work, then I don't know if you can even strive to relate to clients in a way that would be therapeutic for them.
Yeah. And to go back to how you got into this, so it was you tripping for the first time that made you realize this is kind of what you wanted to be doing. And you mentioned how you were going through this dark time. Can you elaborate more on that? That, like, what made you want to what made you want to try that?
Yeah, it's different for everybody what kind of pokes the hole in the veil for them. For me, depression is really defined by a sort of certainty about the world, of sort of certainty that that there's no mystery or possibility left in the world, that there's no reason to wonder or even explore this world anymore. It's kind of the certainty that things aren't going to get better. You might as well stay in bed, right? There's no point in getting up and trying something different. And so, my experience of LSD that first time let a little bit of light in, let a little bit of possibility, and it made me doubt this story that I had developed about the world itself, about it being a place without love, without connection, without hope. So one of the first things that came to mind, I had experienced a lot of my youth being just generally afraid of people, of not believing that I had any means by which to even protect myself enough to navigate the world, to expose myself to it. So one of the things that I got interested immediately after that first trip were martial arts. I started practicing, got into jujitsu and kickboxing, found something for once that I was good at, and that I excelled in, and that actually started to change my chemistry. Right, I started reducing my smoking, reducing my drinking, because I wanted to be able to show up at the dojo and compete with the other trainees. And once I started reducing my smoking and alcohol use, I found that I slept better. So when I was sleeping better, my outlook in the morning changed. So I was more likely to engage and interact with people. Um, I had something that I could be proud of, that I could share with other people, that I could learn to connect over. So just that little nudge that LSD gave me, is this internal feeling that I had strength and that I could sort of defend myself, led me towards the martial arts, which then taught me to literally defend myself, and gave me a sort of armor that was able to carry me into all sorts of experiences that previously seemed just impossible and overwhelming.
I very much relate to whenever you said armor. I think I found LSD when I was in a confusing, darker space, probably not even realizing at the time how dark it was, but then looking back on it, I'm like, whoa, that wasn't me, and all of that. But after doing it and opening up to kind of that type of like love and connection, it made me realize it just gave me that armor to go into social situations that were once hard, or I once had only a negative mindset on, and be able to no longer have that. I never thought about it as armor until just now. That's cute. Wow.
As far as psychedelics in the clinical space, what is the legality of that? Like, how do you work with like the FDA?
So right now there are a few substances that can be worked with, that are considered psychedelic, that can be worked with above ground. I know that you have already had a guest on your show that talked about their experience with ketamine.
Yes.
So ketamine assisted therapy, ketamine assisted psychotherapy is one of the services I'm able to provide above ground. And I use the same training that I learned in the MAPS program for MDMA assisted psychotherapy. I use that same training and protocol with ketamine. Though they're very chemically different drugs, the same sort of approach to working with these substances seems to help across the board with whatever substance you're working with, whether it's LSD or psilocybin or MDMA or ketamine. So right now, unless you're in a clinical trial or working through a program called Expanded Access, there's 2 sites in the U.S. that are taking on clients for MDMA-assisted therapy. They are FDA approved. There's essentially a clause within the FDA's rulings that says if it's a terminal condition or a condition that is not otherwise treated, and you're willing to pay for it yourself without insurance, you can go get MDMA assisted therapy through one of these expanded access sites. Very limited amount of people who are able to access that right now, but it is the first time that I have heard of that outside of a clinical trial, people have been able to take a psychedelic in a therapy setting for a mental health related illness. So ketamine right now is kind of what everybody's working with who's gotten trained in MDMA assisted therapy. It's really the only legal option. Now, one other option that people often look over is cannabis. Actually, there's a fellow Arkansan, I believe, named Daniel McQueen. He's got a center in Boulder, Colorado. I believe it's called the Center for Medicinal Mindfulness. He provides cannabis assisted therapy in a similar format, very similar to the psychedelic format we use with the other substances. They use essentially high doses of a full spectrum blend of cannabis to elicit a sort of psychedelic response. And if you've been around enough people smoking cannabis, most people develop a tolerance for it, and it just becomes a sort of an easy come on high. But we've probably all known someone who's taken an edible and not known how strong it was, or somebody who's particularly sensitive, right? Most of us have fallen down that rabbit hole, right? Absolutely. And I've witnessed it with clients and with friends and colleagues that cannabis can also be used to elicit a very profound psychedelic state, which allows one to work with the sort of inner healing resources that we seek to evoke with all the different substances. So right now we have cannabis, we have MDMA in the context of clinical trials and some limited outlets outside of that, and we have ketamine, which is legal in all 50 states. It's used. People think of it as like a veterinary drug, but it's actually listed as the World Health Organization's like top 10 most needed and necessary
Wow.
medicines in the world. So pretty much I would say every hospital that you go to in the world has ketamine. It's used in emergency medicine a lot. It's also used for children's anesthesia a lot because, and here's kind of the part where it gets psychedelic. When you give kids ketamine, like say a kiddo breaks his arm, falls on the playground, gets brought into the children's hospital, ER, in immediate pain, morphine takes a while to kick in, so they can give a child ketamine and they'll immediately, it won't kill the pain, but it sort of pulls them out of it for a moment. It sort of takes them off. Now, if a child in the context of a ketamine trip, sees elephants dancing or, finds themselves transported to an exotic location, they just come back and say, mommy, I saw the angels. If an adult comes into the ER and gets ketamine, and they do use it in adult ERs as well, and they report, I saw my dead grandmother in the corner of the room while you were sewing up my broken arm. It's a little distressing. So kids are kind of comfortable with that sort of conscious fluidity, moving from one state into another. Adults tend to struggle with it, but yeah, it's used in all settings. When my wife had an emergency C-section, and when she was delivering our child, I heard them say, "Give her everything, put her on nitrous, give her some ketamine, give her some fentanyl, all the things." So ketamine's even safe enough to use, during labor,
Oh,
but it's
wow.
used outside of emergency medicine as a treatment for depression. It's not officially approved by the FDA for depression, which is one of the reasons why it's often not covered by insurance. But it is used in clinics all over the country in the form of IV infusion. So people come in, they lay back in a chair, they get an IV hookup, they're infused with ketamine. People often report having a very psychedelic experience in that context, often without any support or guidance or even preparation for an altered state. They just come in and say, "This will help with your depression, right? We're going to plug this in, lay back. If you see aliens, don't worry about it. If it gets too weird, we'll give you a Xanax, we'll send you out the door." But there's also a movement within ketamine therapy to make it a more psychedelic assisted type experience, to train psychotherapists to sit with people while they're getting an injection, infusion, or a lozenge, dissolvable, fast dissolving tablet, while they're taking it with the intention of altering their consciousness, stepping back from the pain or anxiety that's been plaguing them, and taking a look at those resources within, the ones that you described in your experience with LSD, the ones that people experience with MDMA, that same inner healing wisdom or inner healing resource, I believe is accessible to all people, often through drugs, but often through experiences outside of it. And so ketamine assisted therapy is a new paradigm for treating depression, anxiety, and other mental health illnesses that uses the same model that originated back in the 1950s when people first discovered LSD. It's just been modified slightly, timing slightly different for each drug, but essentially people are doing psychedelic therapy with ketamine, fully legal, all throughout the country.
You mentioned ketamine and like giving birth. What is the information, if there is any, on taking LSD while pregnant or mushrooms?
Well, so I'm not saying this as a prescriber, right? So I would ultimately defer to people with medical degrees, but the wisdom that I have received from medical doctors who work on psychedelic risk reduction is that taken in the third trimester, LSD can actually trigger can trigger you to go into labor. So I would at least advise to avoid it during the last trimester. Now, I know that there are people who have advocated for the use of psychedelics, and said that they're safe to use during pregnancy. I can't advise anyone to do that, but I
Right.
can say that generally it should be avoided at least during the third trimester, because of that risk of initiating pregnancy earlier. But,
Wow.
you know,
Could
I've
you
also
imagine
heard
going?
lots of beautiful experiences that people describe of, you know, taking mushrooms, LSD, during early pregnancy, and having some sort of felt connection with their child in the womb. So
That would be
Whoa.
I can't
so.
rule it out. It's just we need more
Magical.
research.
But then imagine
We
if
need
you're
more.
like, imagine going into labor and you're just tripping your ass off. That would be very crazy.
Well, I will say this from the outside, never given birth, but watching my wife go through labor, that looked like the most psychedelic experience a person could ever have.
I
So,
wonder if
uh, yeah.
psychedelics would even matter in that, like if you were tripping, or like kind of how they say people that trip on a roller coaster don't even notice because they're
There's so
so
much stimulation.
stimulated. That's probably maybe what you would experience with labor. You probably wouldn't even notice too much until afterwards you're staring
That's
at your baby and you're
true.
like, oh my God,
Just
what is
things are a little
happening?
bit more intense.
Yeah.
And
I will say,
feeling.
as an overlap, I think there's a lot of similarities between being with someone when they're on a high dose psychedelic trip and being with someone while they're in childbirth. And actually, there's a lot of doulas who have crossed over and started doing work with psychedelics, because I think some of those core skills of being with people in times of, you know, incredible emotional difficulty. I think it crosses over a lot. There's a whole lot of parallels that have been
Oh.
written extensively by Stanislav Grof, one of the early champions of LSD therapy. He wrote a lot about the parallels of the birth process and the LSD experience. So there's a lot of
Oh.
crossover skills there. And I was really glad that, one, I had a doula present, that we had a doula present when my wife gave birth, but also that I had some experience sitting with people in psychedelic journeys when I was sitting with my wife. I really think there's a whole lot of similarities going on
Wow.
that are worth noting.
Can you talk more to us about the type of clients that you're working with? I know one of the things we did want to talk about was psychedelics healing sexual trauma and all of that. Is that is that one that you see often?
Well, I think it's worth noting in general that that sexual trauma is often is more likely, or generally considered more likely, to create post-traumatic stress symptoms than a lot of other types of trauma. Like if you think about like a motor vehicle accident or something of that nature, sexual traumas are almost always very personal, and they often involve a person that you should by all rights be able to be safe with. So they often occur with people we're familiar with, or in context of a situation that seemed otherwise safe. And so, because of that, a lot of the healing that comes around sexual trauma is also very relational. So if it's a person you felt safe with or should have felt safe with, who was the perpetrator of your sexual abuse, part of healing from that is developing a safe connection with someone else. So it's important to go slow when we're talking about healing from sexual trauma, because essentially you can't just pop into a room with a stranger and have them, you know, give you a medicine or give you a few cues and work through it. You really need to develop that sense of safety again to move through that. So psychedelics for sexual trauma, really powerful tool, also needs to be done within the context of a really safe, supportive, and connected relationship. So I do have people that I work with who've experienced sexual trauma who are using ketamine and cannabis to help heal from that trauma. But there are also people I've developed really solid relationships with over many months, if not years. Um, because of that, it's just it's if it comes up during the context of a journey, there's going to be some really powerful emotional exchange going on, and you want to do that with somebody you really know well and feel safe with. So I think that there's a ton of potential for the use of psychedelics, but I want to be sure and focus on the therapy element of it as well. It's not just the MDMA that's going to cure someone's sexual trauma, though it could get them to a place of safety, help them connect with an inner resource that they may not have been in touch with since the abuse. But I think it's really important that we emphasize that the framework, the setting in which that experience occurs matters a lot.
Absolutely.
What made you want to like I get yeah, what made you want to get into working with people that are dealing or are trying to heal from that? And then is there any type of therapy that you kind of stay away from, like that you're not comfortable dipping into?
Let me start there, and then I'll work my way back to the first part of the question, if you don't mind. There's general advice within the psychedelic therapy community to be careful around certain clients who've had certain types of experiences. People who've had long-term and complex abuse, particularly with parents or close personal figures, um, often struggle in the context of psychedelic therapy because they may have never experienced a truly safe relationship. Um, Now, I don't think that we should put any blacklist out there for types of clients. And the truth be told, that no diagnosis really summarizes the wholeness of a person, right? So someone having a particular diagnosis, is only one factor. But some things that we have to look for are like if somebody has a history of bipolar presentation, some of the psychedelics can trigger a manic episode. And so it's really important that if you're working with someone who has a history of bipolar or manic episodes, that there are lots of supports tied in, that you're not just working with them one-on-one, but that you also have relationships with their family or other support systems that can kind of cue them in and say, hey, I notice you're not sleeping as much, or I notice that you're acting a little unusual. The importance of with all trauma therapy is really that somebody has a really solid base camp. Essentially, if you use that analogy of like mountain climbing, um, for somebody to try to explore Mount Everest, like the first thing they need is a really solid team and a really solid and safe place to prepare. So, you know, trauma work, especially with interpersonal trauma, it's not a fast pursuit. I mean, the number one thing we have to focus on is like, is this person resourced? That's where, I don't know if you've heard of DBT therapy, dialectical behavior therapy,
Yes.
but DBT therapy focuses a lot on connecting people with their resources, getting people into a solid routine with sleep, diet, exercise, substance use, and safe interpersonal relationships. I consider those skills to be really essential for someone to benefit from psychedelic therapy. Now, to be more direct in answering your question, I have run into trouble with people who have kind of a baseline belief that everyone's out to get them, and that sort of the best thing they can do is beat everyone to it. Some people that might be labeled narcissistic personality disorder or antisocial personality disorders, people kind of whose baseline is, the world itself is a rat race, it's a dangerous game, and I'm going to make sure that if anybody gets exploited, it's not me. That can create some real problems in the context of psychedelic therapy. You know, I don't want a situation to ever get violent, or a person to ever feel empowered to hurt or harm others. So those are things that I would say we definitely look out for, is any history of like interpersonal violence, manipulation, exploitation.
Oh yeah.
Those are things that scare me.
Do you
I've
think?
had I've had a stalker before that emerged from a client patient relationship, and it
Wow.
really fit that bill. I think it was someone who really may have not ever been interested in therapy with me, but sort of just wanted to play a game, wanted to play a sort of cat and mouse predatory game.
Oh my
Um,
God.
and that was really a trial for me as a therapist to hold space, to hold compassion for all people is one of the things we aspire to as therapists. And it's hard to hold space for someone when you're
Oh
scared of
right.
them, when you're scared of being harmed by them. So that's something that has changed my screening practice a little bit.
Do you think something like psychedelic and MDMA therapy sessions would help mental health disorders like narcissistic personality disorder?
I think that one of the things that has to be in place before a person can benefit from from psychedelic therapy is a really solid support system. And for a person who has a long history of interpersonal manipulativeness, of harming others or finding joy in harming others or exploiting others or lying or playing games with others, they really need to be in a setting where accountability is high, where they're essentially not able to play those sort of games. Um, so if someone is kind of still out there in the world pursuing that sort of strategy of interpersonal relationships, I don't know if they can really benefit, because it may just be that they spend that psychedelic energy on figuring out the next game, right? That, that they just get even more empowered. Now, the important caveat to that is that all people have narcissistic traits from one time or another. So again, we don't want to just label people based off of their diagnosis. A personality disorder just says that somebody has a pattern of behavior. Behaviors can change, so a pattern of behavior can also change.
I learned over the weekend that they have removed narcissistic personality disorder from, I don't know what it is, like it being
The
able
DSM.
to.
Yeah.
Yes, because everybody has traits of being narcissistic, so they've removed it
From what?
What was
It's
it?
called the Diagnostics and Statistics Manual. It's there's many versions of it. I think we're in 5.5 or something like that right now. But essentially, it's the book that insurance companies use to determine whether they're going to pay for a particular service. It has very little use for therapists. It's mostly a tool used by insurance companies, but the popular culture kind of grabs certain diagnosis from it every once in a while, and they use that as the new word for bad guy, right? So for a while, borderline was considered like just the phrase that you threw at somebody that you didn't like or that you didn't like their behavior, and it was kind of it's like calling someone a monster. And now there's been a lot of push to build compassion for persons that have been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. Right now, narcissist is kind of that label. It's the new monster. But as you said, Stephanie, all people, if you've ever hung out with like an 8-year-old, like, they're all about themselves. They think, they got it all figured out,
We're all selfish. We're all really just
Right.
into ourselves, and that's fine as long as you're not hurting
Yeah.
people. So I guess that I get why it's removed. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, most of those diagnoses don't have a lot of research support, to be honest. There's just like, we know that people's personality and their way of interacting in the world changes depending on the context they're in. If a person's just gone through a major loss, if they're under financial distress, they might display characteristics of a personality disorder that when things are going good, when they got, when their healthcare needs are taken care of, when their housing needs are taken care of, they might be a completely different person.
When it comes to clinical sessions with you, can you describe what the psychedelic and or MDMA sessions
What's it
look
like?
like?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that because it is very different. Very different in that, most people think of psychotherapy as talk therapy, where the main goal is to talk. Most people think of talk therapy as talking about your feelings or talking about your thoughts. And a lot of people still perceive therapy as being primarily about changing your thoughts or changing your feelings. A little bit more modern approach to describing therapy would be to say it's about behavior. It's about figuring out which behaviors are in the service of your values or the life you want to live, and which ones are not. But it's still primarily in practice about talking about, what did you do last week? What did you do when they said this? Here's what are you going to do next time, right? It's about changing behavior through talking about it. Psychedelic therapy it can be very different from that in that sometimes there's not a lot of talking at all. The basic structure of psychedelic therapy, regardless of the medicine that you're working with, is preparation, whereby essentially you educate someone on the varieties of experiences that they might have under the influences of the substance. You talk to them about the potential physical reactions, the potential emotional reactions, the potential internal spaces that they might encounter. And you talk with them about why it is that they're interested in having this kind of experience. We call that intention setting often, whereby a person thinks about the sort of changes they would like to see in their life, the sort of changes they'd like to see in their relationships, in their own relationship with themselves, with their body, with their eating, their sleeping, their substance use, their relationships. So we get them to kind of hone in on a sort of target, something they would like to see change. And the goal of setting that intention is so that when they get into the psychedelic space and they're feeling like they're ready to work on something important, they can kind of bring their mind back to that question, that intention, that hope that they have. So preparation sessions occur before the substance is taken and look a little bit more like traditional psychotherapy. But then during the actual medicine session, um, the way that I work and the way I was trained to work from Polaris Institute, which is in San Francisco, Polaris Insight Center, they're all sharing the same model, the same one that's described by the MAPS program for MDMA assisted therapy. It's essentially you have somebody come in, you do a brief sort of initiatory ritual with them. Sometimes that's reading a poem, looking at pictures of a loved one, setting some items that are personally meaningful for them on an altar type space so they can look at and remember their intention for the setting. Then they lay down. They generally put eye shades on, eye covers, so that they're in essentially complete darkness. And then you start playing music for them, either in headphones or in speakers in the room. And we encourage them to essentially notice what's coming up internally for them, to notice the sensations in the body, to notice the emotional changes that are happening, to notice the internal visuals that are occurring, and to sort of just sit back and experience it all, to continually bring their attention back to it. If challenging material comes up, to treat it with curiosity, to explore it as if it has an important message or meaning for them. So the therapist's role during the session is to be as hands off as possible, to be out, to get out of the way and let them have an internal experience. We believe that the ultimate source of healing is not the therapist; it's rather their own internal source of wisdom, their own lived experience, their inner healing connection. Second to that, the medicine is the kind of the mover in this situation, and then on top of that is the music, and really all those are more important than the therapist. The therapist is essentially there to just hold the space, make sure that the participant knows that essentially everything outside their skin is fine. They don't need to worry about it. They don't need to look around to make sure they're safe. They don't need to worry about if somebody's calling for help. They can just go inside, and we're essentially just hanging out, making sure their bodies are safe. Now, if they run into challenges along the way, if they get overwhelmed or scared, or they don't feel the courage to look at what's showing up for them, we have some tools and skills that can help them get grounded, get connected to their inner resource, and to go back into their internal experience. But that's essentially the whole medicine session is spent with the client keeping an internal focus and the therapist providing a sort of ground control or ground support. And then after that, just one more thing. If after that session, then we have what are called integration sessions, which are scheduled for follow up, where then we do talk about what came up and have kind of a back and forth to see what we can derive from that experience and to see if there's any behavioral changes that person might incorporate into their life that would sort of extend the benefit of the insight they gained during the medicine sessions.
So during these medicine sessions, what is the popular medicine of choice? Because I personally, like with LSD, I know it takes not only 1 hour to kick in, but then like really by the third or fourth hour, that's when, or second, it's like that's when things are really heavy, that you get the most out of it. And so I'm like, what is the medicine choice and how long are these sessions?
Yeah, so what ultimately we're talking about mostly today is what is the preference for the therapist? In other words, what amount of time can a therapist give to a client? What can they access legally or access in a way that is safe for them to continue practicing? So going back a little bit, one of the early psychedelic therapists that trained a lot of the researchers now that are in charge of a lot of the training programs and research projects, his name was Leo Zeff. He had a practice whereby if he was introduced to someone, the first session he would do with them would be one-on-one, and he would give them like 400 micrograms of LSD, which is a lot. Most people who've taken LSD recreationally, if they've taken a tab at a fish show or something like that, they took maybe 50 micrograms or 100. You know,
Wow.
if somebody says, oh man, I took 2, that means they might have taken like 100 to 200 micrograms. So he would start people off on these massive doses
Whoa.
I've
of
done
like
4
really
one
pure
time.
LSD.
Why would he do so much?
Well, he was really confident, and he was really willing to deal with whatever came up. He had a protocol that he went through where essentially he said, you know, everything in your skin, you know, I trust you with it, but anything outside of the skin, that's on me. You know, he would tell people like, I need you to agree that if I tell you to jump out of a window because this building's on fire, you're going to jump out of a window. And so was a person that was able to foster immense trust with his clients. All of his clients were referred through trusted others who had been through his practice, and he really gave himself to it. He was doing marathon psychotherapy essentially, and then after he had done that work, he would then introduce those individuals to a group, where in the group there would be essentially, you know, 1 or 2 sober sitters, and the group would be on all different substances. They might be on MDMA, mescaline, LSD, essentially whatever was available. So that was how people used to do it. Now people worry about time and cost, and that has led most therapists and most psychedelic research companies to look into what's the briefest trip that we can take people on. You know, if you look at it, a therapist makes between $100 to $200 an hour. So if they are giving, you know, 8 hours of their time to a client, that's potentially 800 to, you know, $1,200, $1,500 for one session. It's a lot of time if somebody's going to be there for a whole 8 hours. If somebody takes psilocybin, they might need a therapist for 8 hours. If they take LSD, they might need a therapist for 12 hours. If they take MDMA, they may need a therapist for 4 or 5 hours, or they might need them for 8 to 12. It really just depends on the client's sensitivity. So nowadays, people are primarily working with ketamine because it's fast. If you're getting an injection of ketamine, in 45 minutes, you're going to be pretty much back in your body. And within an hour and a half, you could possibly drive home. 2 hours, pretty safe to go home. So that has been the most cost-effective tool that most therapists are using right now. If other substances become available, like 5-MeO-DMT is something that takes about 20 to 45 minutes. Also be extremely powerful and profound. It's considered one of the most powerful psychedelics we've ever found. So at some point you may see, you know, clinics where people are able to pop in and, you know, ingest some 5-MeO-DMT and be out of there in an hour and a half and only have to pay $200 for a session. But right now, mostly what determines what substance people use is cost and time.
Have you found people that want to do the full like 8 to 12 hour experience and like really get?
Absolutely.
I was about to say, like maybe once every year, someone like wants to pay for that and like does budget that. It's definitely possible, I guess. Yeah.
I mean, so another piece of this that we haven't really touched on, but I want to make sure is clear, is that what I've been describing is the medical approach, and that is essentially working within the medical system to provide this service. Far more people are ingesting substances and getting therapy through the underground than are in the above ground. And a lot of people who practice legal psychedelic medicine with ketamine, MDMA, they are doing the same work in the underground, usually with a little bit different format. There's often group therapy rather than individual, but you can see advertised all over the internet people who are former psychologists or practicing psychologists who offer 5-MeO-DMT retreats in Mexico, or San Pedro, which is a mescaline containing cactus in Costa Rica. So a lot of people are accessing these substances outside of the medical world. And I honestly believe that's probably where most people are going to stay. There's so many loopholes to jump through to get something to market. Essentially, MDMA, they've been trying for at least 20 years to get the FDA to approve it. Now, attorney generals and medical authorities have said this is a relatively safe substance. As long as you don't get overheated, don't get too dehydrated, most people could take this and be safe with it. But the the FDA has a very understandably rigorous process, and that has meant that everything is slow. There's a kind of a joke in the psychedelic world that psychedelic medicine is 5 years away, and it always will be.
Mm.
Now,
Mhm.
in the meantime, people are like in Oregon, right? There's a psilocybin facilitation program that's state sponsored. There was a ballot initiative in Oregon that passed that allowed Oregon to set up its own program similar to like the medical marijuana program, whereby people will be able to get trained and participate in psilocybin assisted therapy legally within the state of Oregon. I suspect that those moves will continue throughout the country, that other states will follow. Oregon was the first state to legalize medical cannabis, and now it's the first state to legalize psilocybin. It took about 20 years for half the country to get on board with cannabis. I'm hoping it will take less time with psilocybin, but even outside of the legal route of ballot initiatives, there are churches popping up in every state in the U.S. that are offering psilocybin and ayahuasca and
Wow.
other substances, and they're doing it completely above ground. They're advertising it on their website, $600 for a psilocybin session, and
Is
they're
the
able to do
government
that.
trying to shut
Yeah,
those
go.
down?
Not right now.
Mm.
It seems to be a very low priority.
Are they
Wow.
So
safe? Are these sessions like trustworthy?
well, that's kind of the problem of going outside of the medical system is that there's really there's no board to report to. There's no authority that governs how these things are used. It's I don't want to say it's the Wild West, but I've heard some really great experiences
Mm.
that have happened within the context of those sort of they call them entheogenic churches, and I've heard some really negative experiences. Um, but unfortunately, I think that's a side effect of all the of how long it's taken to try to do anything legally. My hope right now is that regardless of the route, whether people are taking it through a church, taking it through a research trial, or taking it with their friends on the beach, that they're able to access the sort of information that allows them to reduce the risk of taking that substance and increase the benefit. So, I spent about $5,000 on training to be an MDMA assisted therapist. I don't know if I'll ever legally be able to do that work, but I can take the knowledge that I got from that program and share it with as many people as possible. People were doing MDMA before they started pursuing FDA approval. They'll be doing it afterwards. I don't know if y'all have seen this, but every popular magazine uh, at the grocery store has a story about psychedelics in it these days. So the interest is growing. People are looking for routes to safely take these substances, and I think it's the responsibility of those of us in the mental health professions to teach people how to more safely use these substances and get benefit from them.
When people are doing the medical route and everything, where do are professionals able to get like clean LSD or clean MDMA? Like
Yeah, where's it sourced from?
yeah.
Yeah, it's wild. It's essentially a gray market. It's not a black market because you don't have to go like find a guy in an alley. You
Mm-hmm.
can just get on the internet and order all this stuff. The dark web is not nearly as dark as it claims to be. People are essentially finding the dark web version of Amazon and ordering products that have been reviewed by trusted
Wow.
testers. So essentially, there are websites people can access through the dark web where people list products, and depending on that person's rating, just like it's an eBay seller or Etsy shop or something, people say, yeah, I got this product, I tested it, it's the real thing, I took some, it was great. And based on ratings, people are buying these substances. Now, the actual quality of them, I don't know how to
That's where it's
assess. I wouldn't
gray.
encourage anybody to purchase that way, but I do encourage people who are purchasing substances online to buy test kits to make sure that what they're ingesting is actually what it claims to be. Now, those kits won't tell you if there's other stuff in it. You can buy fentanyl kits online where you can swab your material and make sure that the ketamine or MDMA or whatever white powder you purchased on the internet doesn't contain fentanyl. But it's still safer than just ingesting mystery powders.
Is
So
that where you
um,
sourced your stuff?
I have never purchased anything through the dark web. I learned about these things through clients
Well, I
who
guess,
regularly do so.
yeah,
Yeah.
I guess that's what we were wondering is like, where do you source it?
I think clients
So
have their own, right?
obviously, being a mental health professional who's taken an ethical commitment to never break the law, I have never purchased an
Mm.
illicit substance. Uh, but if I were going to, I would want to test it before I ingested it and measure out the amounts as safely as possible. There are people in the underground who really care about sourcing and that are developing networks to try to make sure there's like a chain from essentially farm to table, right?
Mm.
So the farm to table LSD trade is growing, but they're doing that at great risk because the same process that they use to vet and ensure the substances are safe is also a process that the DEA, if they did decide to make this a priority, could use to track down who produce these substances.
Mm.
So, as far as safety goes, what I would advise is to check out dancesafe.org. They have been, at least since the 90s, providing drug testing kits. You can buy them online and ensure that the things you ingest are what they say they are. They may have adulterants in them, they may have other substances, but it's still safer than taking them at a mystery. A lot of people in this country still get their psychedelics from music festivals, from all night dance parties, um, and for the most part, people do that and are safe. But then there are also many cases where people end up in the ER because they've ingested either too much of a substance or ingested something that they didn't know what it was. So um, as a professional, I don't advocate that anybody obtain drugs illicitly, but people are going to do that, and it's naive to pretend. It's like saying, I don't support teenagers having sex, so I'm not going to educate them on how sex works, right? I'm not
Yeah.
going to give them an education. People are going to use these substances. People have needs for healing, for connection, for personal spiritual development. They're going to use these substances. So as a professional, I just want to equip people with the tools to reduce the risk associated with doing so.
We are seeing test kits at festivals. Like people are. That's what I just got back from Electric Forest, and I saw all around. Like
Oh, I love Forest.
I do too. It was a great
Mm-hmm.
experience, and we were seeing like, oh, free test kits. Like, please test your stuff because they're not gonna act like they're not gonna pretend like you're not doing it there. You're gonna do it. So at least that they can provide safety and like
Yeah.
extra things for you.
And unfortunately, Electric Forest is kind of radical in that sense, in that a lot of festivals will throw people out for bringing in test kits, will confiscate test kits, which just increase the risk of people harming themselves taking the wrong substance. So the fact that Electric Forest, Lightning in a Bottle, Burning Man, other festivals have taken a proactive role and said, like, no, we know that's what's going on. We're not the ones providing it, but we are going to try to keep people safe. It's really progressive, and I hope that our courts, our laws respects that. There was a little festival right north of Arkansas in southern Missouri that was shut down and their land was confiscated um, under essentially a modified version of the crack house laws that said essentially you can punish a landowner or property owner for the drugs that are consumed on their property. Now, I think there was plenty of evidence to suggest that the people involved in running that show were also involved in probably the provision of some of the substances. So
Oh.
they were not. I don't think totally clean of any responsibility for drug use there, but there's a lot of fear in the festival world that if we acknowledge that there's drugs going on at our event, that we could be punished for it. So I hope at some point there's some case precedent set that says, um, you don't punish the festival owners for people doing drugs safely at their event.
Right. Do you have when it comes to being in Arkansas, I'm not sure if anyone has done these practices there or not, but have you been seeing a shift and a change in the South going towards a more positive movement with this, or do you have like a personal story or like?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh,
So,
and Lacey, I wanted to answer your question a little differently. You asked me where I source them. All my clients that do legal psychedelic therapy with me, they either obtain their cannabis through a dispensary because they have a cannabis card, or they get ketamine prescribed from their doctor. So
Mm.
most of my clients, or all my clients that do ketamine assisted therapy, have a prescription. They get usually sent home a nasal spray bottle, like your previous guest on the show. They use nasal spray at home. I sit with them via video. So they're seeing me just like you are with the same setting. I have done preparation with them through video therapy. They lay down in the comfort of their own home in their bed or on their couch. I can see them. We go through the ritual just like I'm in person, but they self-administer ketamine at the dosage that they've agreed upon with their doctor, and I'm there to provide them support should they need it.
oh, okay.
Um, but Stephanie, you were asking about specifically being in the South and doing psychedelic therapy. One of the things that I think is worth noting and interesting is that people in the South have been taking psychedelics, essentially as long as people on the West Coast or East Coast. The use of psilocybin mushrooms. Psilocybin mushrooms grow wild here, particularly around the cow fields. So
Yeah.
there has been it's rather obscure and not talked about a lot, but there's been a folk medicine practice within Arkansas for a long time. I've heard stories about herbalists mixing up remedies with everything from Jimson weed, which is a psychedelic, to mandrake and other substances. So there has been a long lineage here in Arkansas of people using these substances, but that kind of work could really put a person at odds with the church here. That kind of says, whatever you're doing over there, with alcohol, cannabis, with mushrooms is not okay. But the interesting thing is, like, using cannabis is essentially approved by more than half of people in the state of Arkansas. It was approved through a voter initiative, and polling indicates that most people in Arkansas see it as a healing tool. So there's been a lot of progress there, and I associate a lot of that with our veteran community. Veterans returning from the war in Iraq and Afghanistan have really pushed for being able to use cannabis to help them manage PTSD, and even in America's heartland, in very rural and conservative and Christian areas, people care about their veterans and they want them to have the tools they need. So approval is generally increased around cannabis. And as far as ketamine goes, it's really flown under the radar. It's been used, like I said, in medicine all this time. Uh, and now that it's being used to treat depression, I think a lot of the fear was that if people take psychedelics, they're going to turn into hippies overnight. They're going to change their voting style. They're going to, suddenly, want to give up their jobs and pick flowers all day. Reality is, most of the time when people take psychedelics, they just kind of become um, more of themselves. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, people don't tend to radically alter their political affiliation unless they are suddenly around a new group of people that have a different political affiliation. I think a lot of the reason why we saw cultural change around the last psychedelic emergence is because people were going out to California and they were around people who had new ideas, different ways of thinking. And then they were taking psychedelics, which then helped them bond with those people, and they formed new families essentially around that. So it wasn't as if in the middle of their southern town, they suddenly, believed in free love, right? It's that they were around people. So what I'm getting at is that I don't think psychedelics are as much of a cultural threat as they were made out to be by Nixon and the sort of political backlash that followed, Timothy Leary and Ram Dass and all those folks coming out. So I don't think there's actually that much push against it right now. Psilocybin, there are psilocybin facilitators all over the state of Arkansas, people that grow their own mushrooms and that share them with friends as needed as healing tools. I haven't seen any pushback against that either, because again, people aren't leaving their religion. They're not suddenly becoming substantially different people. They're just finding healing and improving their functioning.
Right. Yeah. I think that is like a big fear with especially conservative people, that psychedelics will change, do all these things, and it's just not the case. But we did have a psychedelic research lawyer on, and she was talking about how there is a push in California for not really mushrooms to be able to be purchased, but in a sense that it would be encouraged that it's legal for you to grow them and then to share them within your community and like your neighborhood and to see the positive impacts on that. But I did want to ask, kind of, because you've mentioned like California and all of that, did psychedelics have an influence on Silicon Valley?
Oh, absolutely. That's well documented. Yeah. It's funny reading about it even today. Like I think when Google was picking their new CEO, they like took their potential candidate to Burning Man, like flew him in,
Wow.
essentially gave him a modern version of the electric Kool-Aid acid test. Like just put him on a dose, took him through the crowd on an art car, and saw if he held it together or not. Yeah, that's
Wow.
completely undeniable. From Steve Jobs to Bill Gates, all those folks have attributed some of their ideas and innovations to psychedelics. I think just going back to the history, psilocybin mushrooms were used by the ancient Aztec and Mayan cultures, and those cultures had a religion based on human sacrifice. So they were using psychedelics and sacrificing people, probably at the same time. So psychedelics themselves, I don't believe change a person's values. I really don't. I used to believe that because they help me get in touch with my own. But I
Right.
really think it's all about the context. So if people who identify as white supremacists are using MDMA, yeah, they're going to experience a sort of a feeling of connection and group love, but it's going to be for people in their group. And there are documented cases where white supremacist groups, Proud Boys and others, have been using MDMA at their parties to sort of, solidify their group. As terrifying as that is, I think
Yeah.
it's also evidence that that psychedelics aren't quite the cultural threat that they've been made out to be.
Do you think, though, if a white supremacist was in a room of all colored people tripping, that would be different?
I really do. I think now a big element of that is, would there be people who could support them in feeling safe, right? when all the paranoia and fear overwhelms this person, are there going to be a couple of even tempered white people who can say, hey man, we really are cool here. These people are fine. Like we're all just, hanging out. There's actually been some research with Palestinians and Israelis where they took people from both sides of the wall and had them eat a dinner together and take MDMA, and their feelings of fear significantly dropped. Their capacity to hold compassion for one another definitely dropped. So yeah, I don't want to take away the power of these substances. Really, I just want to put out there that it's just as important to think about the context in which a substance is taken, right? It's who you take it with. It's the stories that you've heard about the drug. People who take drugs who think it's poison, people say, oh, mushrooms, LSD, they got strychnine in them. If you take a substance and you've got that story in your mind about it, you may have a really bad time. If you
Right.
have the story that this is a therapeutic tool that might help you get some new insight into your depression or anxiety, that's very different. If you're told this is going to make you see the Buddha or God, or it's going to destroy you or something like that, that changes what you experience on the trip too. So if used as medicine, I think psychedelics could be rolled out in Arkansas as easily as they could anywhere else.
Right. Yeah. Whenever I first discovered LSD, someone told me, and this is how I felt. They were like, if all the world's leaders were able to trip together in the same room, there would be no more war. I was like, I don't know how I feel about that. I don't know. It's like I did agree, but then also I'm like, I don't know.
Well,
So-
we talked earlier about how people who are really narcissistic struggle
Yeah.
when they take psychedelics. I don't know if you got all the world leaders together, if they wouldn't just come up with a new way to kill each other.
Oh,
or
that's
something
true.
like that.
Yeah, the hopeful part of me wants to believe that would be quite beneficial, but there's
yeah.
a huge other side of reality.
Yeah, most people start off after their first psychedelic experience, really hopeful about the change that these substances could elicit, and no doubt they are absolutely powerful. But like we talked about on that trauma journey, we take psychedelics for individual healing, but they're also a force for cultural healing. And if we're gonna heal the sort of cultural traumas that I think are behind most of the schisms and isms in our society today, there's going to need to be a lot of groundwork, a lot of base camp building. So figuring out how to get people to experience togetherness, tolerance, and acceptance, those are things that are all, I think, prerequisites for people having these sort of deep, vulnerable experiences that can then lead them towards, those kind of ideals that most of the world's religions hold up, like compassion, love, peace.
You've mentioned trauma just then, and that kind of reminded me because I do want to ask you about this. Can you kind of elaborate more on the therapy within sex positive communities? We have like kink and BDSM highlighted and stuff. Yeah, we kind of
polyamorous, non-monogamous.
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the groups. So let me just tell it as a story a little bit. When I got into doing therapy, I really thought that I needed to appeal to the most people possible. It's like if I'm going to be successful working for myself as a private, business owner and therapist, I'm going to need to be as vanilla and approachable a therapist as I can be to, sort of have a line, a hook in every pond. What I figured out pretty quickly was that there are a lot of people in the state of Arkansas who don't feel safe in therapy for many different reasons, because they're a religious minority, because they have been hurt by their experience in the church and don't feel safe with a therapist who's aligned with the church or who draws on religion to influence their therapy. I found people who didn't feel safe in therapy because they had kinks or were practicing BDSM and didn't like being pathologized by therapists who assumed that if they were doing something like that, they must be broken somehow. There's a lot of people I would say most people in the kink and BDSM community don't see themselves as broken or needing fixing. They see this as an enriching aspect of their life. Some see it as a hobby, but some people elevate it to a sort of spiritual place for themselves. So I started finding these communities that really weren't being helped in our community, and as I looked around for people to refer them to who could provide them help that was knowledgeable, I didn't find that. So I essentially just did the same thing I did with psychedelic therapy. I just started educating myself. And as soon as I started actually learning about kink, BDSM, polyamory, consensual non-monogamy, I realized that this is one of the most pathologized communities there are in our country. And there's really no need for it. These folks need therapy. Often has nothing to do with being polyamorous or being into kink. Sometimes, often it does have to do with being stigmatized, with not being feeling safe with their coworkers, with their family, with their friends, in expressing this important aspect of their identity. So I started putting out a shingle saying, that I was a kink-aware therapist, that I was a sex-positive therapist, that I would work with people in poly relationships. And the requests just came pouring in. I realized that this was like, these are my people. This is my niche here. And it's been really awesome just to see how people's anxiety reduces when they feel safe in just talking about who they are, what they're into, and letting it be a part of their identity they don't have to hide, that they can share themselves and others.
I like that a lot.
Yeah, thank God you're in Arkansas. I just feel like there isn't that. I mean, there's not enough of that, and people really, they need it everywhere, but personally, I feel like resources in Arkansas or just the South in general aren't as accessible. So, or they're accessible, but they're not as much of an option in more progressive cities and stuff. So, or states. So, I think that's great. And before we start, kind of wrapping up everything, we did want to talk about nutrition and diet and your views on that and how you tie that into your practice or beliefs.
Absolutely. If there's three or four things that kind of make up the core of how I work with people. I want to know, um, have like we've already talked about psychedelics. I want to know, have they had or are they interested in having a transpersonal or psychedelic experience? How has that affected their life? I want to know, are they enjoying their sexual experience? Right? If there's one thing that I think would benefit the South as much as psychedelics, it would be good sex. Just helping people have
Yeah.
better
Wow.
sex.
With all of that
I
fucking
think,
religious repression, like just pushed down people's throats, yeah, some good sex would do the South some good.
Wow,
I mean,
some deep
if you look
intimate.
at if you look at Pornhub's data, Pornhub has data on every state in the country on what people search for and what people are looking for. People in conservative, religious, high, sexually repressed regions, including Arkansas, are the kinkiest of all.
Mm-hmm.
So just giving people the empowerment to say, like, this is what I'm into, this is what I want to do, this is what I'm looking for. I think would alleviate so much stress. I think a lot of people's prescription drug dependence would lighten up if they could just have a good orgasm a day. But beyond that, sorry, you were asking about nutrition. Yeah. So beyond psychedelics and sex, the thing I probably talk to people the most about are getting into a healthy relationship with food, exercise, and sleep. And one of the ways that we're really starved here in Arkansas is in the areas of nutrition. Most of Arkansans live in a food desert. They consume a lot of processed food. Getting access to fresh, locally grown, vegetable-based foods is a struggle for most people out of the very kind of cosmopolitan Little Rock area or
Yeah.
the affluent Northwest Arkansas, Fayetteville, Bentonville regions, and I've not seen much that has more of an impact on a person's just daily functioning than being able to make healthy nutritional choices. So yeah, I know that y'all are both advocates of plant-based diet. I think if I worked exclusively with vegans, might be out of a job in Little Rock. But I do encourage people to look at where their food comes from. If they are meat eaters, to think about where it's being sourced. To look at working with local uh, people, local farmers, and to consider the role that whole plant nutrition might play in addressing the sort of physical discomfort that underlies a lot of their mental distress.
Yeah. I visited home for 2 weeks, like 2 weeks ago, and it feels so unfair and it feels like a disservice to the people down there that there is not access to good food. Like, it is
Yes.
so hard to eat good food. I'm not just talking like healthy plant-based salad. I'm talking about like organic, like whole
Yes.
foods. Like everything's
Mm.
fried and it's just shitty meats and like shitty vegetables. And I just felt gross down there. And I just think
Yeah.
it's such a shame because food really does affect how you feel. It does affect your mental health.
It's everything.
Absolutely, Lindsay,
It's
yeah.
yeah, it's your energy, and it like I don't understand because the South is where agriculture
Yes.
lives, and they are the least like they have the least amount of access to good food.
Yeah, I mean, you're dead on. We have the capacity here in Arkansas to grow, fresh fruits and vegetables that enough to literally feed everyone in our state and then some. We're one of the biggest producers of rice and soybeans in the country,
Mm-hmm.
and we feed literally the rest of the world. But most of the people here don't get to benefit from that. Even the very wealthy in Arkansas tend to eat in a way that most folks in California would turn their nose to.
Mm-hmm.
People who are considered the top of our economic ladder still think that the best they can do is order burgers from the local spot, and they have health problems as a result. They may be the wealthiest people in our community, but they struggle with diabetes, obesity, with all sorts of problems that are rooted in their dietary choices. And a lot of that has to do with the really powerful lobbying forces that control our legislature here. We are a state that is run by Walmart, that is run by Tyson Foods, and our children from the moment they enter public schools are fed the foods that they're given by Cisco and other big food
Mm-hmm.
conglomerates that are more interested in producing a quantity of calories than a quality. Um, you have to work hard here. You have to visit farmers markets. You have to have a home garden if you want to keep a steady supply of micronutrients in your diet. And you know, I honestly think that to bring psychedelics back into the conversation, one of the things that I see repeated over and over is when people get back from an ayahuasca retreat or when they've had a psychedelic experience, one of the most common bits of insight that they get is, I need to start eating better. I mean,
Mm.
it's amazing how commonly people come to that
That
basic
is
insight of, I really want to change the way I eat.
Wow, that's
wow.
really
Well,
interesting.
that's true too, because after you trip for the first time and one of our friends, y'all turned vegan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it just
It's
is.
tempting.
There's no reason to like kill animals, you know?
Right.
Like, I definitely, we had someone on talk about like living a plant based diet. And so I don't think, we don't think everyone needs to be vegan, but I think
Yeah.
being plant based and conscious about what you eat is super important.
Absolutely. In most of our cultural traditions, including Christianity up until about the late 80s, there was a sort of reverence towards food. There was this idea of being stewards of the land, of really like, of praying over your food, not just to say, thank you to Jesus for giving me this meal, but to say, like, to acknowledge the pain and suffering and the work that it took to put this food on the table. And that was considered like, there was a sacred relationship with food. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that one of the potentials of psychedelic work can be kind of reigniting that passion for the just really the sacredness of all life and the processes that keep us alive. So, I hope as more and more people become awakened to that reality, that you'll see more demand for whole foods here. There, at least in Little Rock, there's a growing number of vegan food producers and restaurants and small farmers that are able to produce more ethically sustainable meat products, but also bringing vegetables into the diet. And the truth is, regardless of your cultural background, once you start eating good food and start feeling better, you're going to demand it. People who come from cultures where there's lots of stereotyping around nutrition and food, once they start eating good food, they want it. They want vegan food because you just feel better. So um, I have hope that the word will grow, that people will start demanding better things for their family, better things for their children, and start to take ownership and interest in where their food comes from.
Mm-hmm.
Psychedelics and vegan food are 5 years away. So
Yeah.
It always will be. No, yeah, I may have. I hope nobody from Walmart listens to this because I might be tipping them off to the real revolution out there. It's going to be a psychedelic food revolution.
well, Walmart is getting into producing vegan food, and Tyson's working on like a vegan chicken and stuff.
Yeah,
And
because
And
there's
it's
money
so
there.
good.
I just
Yeah, you're right. Absolutely. I've been feeding our child vegan chicken nuggets, and they're so much better.
oh my
I
gosh,
really think if the demand shows up, I mean, these are corporations; they want to make money. So, Walmart, they started carrying vegan yogurt like 10 years or vegan yogurt a few years ago, and they've started to expand their offerings. So, I don't think we need to burn down the systems that are in place. We just need to
rework
expose
them.
people to healthy food so that they can ask for it and see the benefit in paying for it.
Yeah, I'm been vegan for over 10 years and gluten free since August. So it's like it's so exhausting, but it really, and then my boyfriend just turned vegan and gluten free too, just to hop on the bandwagon.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
he and I just notice, and him especially because he's newer with it, how just better you feel. And then
absolutely.
whenever he did eat, he had noodles, like just because the restaurant accidentally gave him regular noodles, he
Yes.
felt bad. And then people
Hmm.
notice that when you're eating healthy, and then when you have a moment where you don't, you like want to. It slows you down. You feel sluggish, kind of like how you feel like whenever you eat at Thanksgiving, you want to take a nap after. And I'm just
Yes.
like, food does
Yes.
not need to make you tired, but a lot of
Absolutely.
people they are normalized in that. They don't even know that they could feel better than they do because every day of their life they've been given chicken and meat and dairy and all this stuff. So they think that they feel as good as they can. And when they switch up their diet, then they're like, oh, I feel so much better now. So
Yes,
that was it.
absolutely. One of the first things I teach people about is blood sugar. You know, you don't have to be diabetic to think about the blood sugar impacts that the food you eat. You know, if you have a diet that's based on, if you have a diet that's based on protein and fat, you know, that doesn't produce a huge insulin response. If your diet is mostly based on carbs and sugar, you're going to experience an insulin response. And a lot of people aren't even aware that, you know, the sluggishness that they feel that they're then medicating with caffeine and sugar is a result of the foods that they've eaten. So once they start to shift and change their diet and start to really notice and bring awareness to how their food affects the way they feel, then it becomes a sort of self-reinforcing process.
Yeah. I've tried to educate my boyfriend too on the blood sugar. Like before he was vegan, I would always be hungry, and then whenever I am hungry, I'm like, I feel like lightheaded or something. I'm like, yeah, I think my blood sugar's low. I just need to like really just eat. And he's like, are you diabetic? And I'm like, no, but it is important, especially being vegan, that you're just eating, you know, like, and I'm eating all the time, and I love that because I love to eat. So and it is, blood sugar is a thing no matter what. You don't have to be like diabetic to need it. You're like to regulate it or pay attention to it.
Yeah, and diet isn't about just weight loss either.
Right.
You know, people can be healthy at every size. They just need to figure out what foods facilitate the kind of life that they care about living.
Yeah, exactly. Well, dang. Is there anything that we didn't ask you that would be like very important to talk about?
Let's see. So one of the things I wanted to make sure and talk about was how we can make psychedelics more accessible here in Arkansas. One of the problems that we've already touched on a little bit is that it's really expensive for a person to sit in front of a therapist who charges $100 an hour. So one of the ways that you can circumvent that would be to take a more group approach to therapy. And in the South, you know, people are already kind of acclimated to the idea of connecting with, being vulnerable, and sharing emotions within group because most of us are raised in the church. So many of us have had those church camp experiences whereby we, you know, listen to music together, we sing together, and we experience a sort of emotional connection and catharsis. So we already have that kind of model in our culture. My hope is that as entheogenic churches take on a bigger role in providing psychedelic therapy and services across the nation, that there will be the possibility for people in Arkansas to experience that same kind of healing experience in the context not of an Orthodox religion, but in a psychedelic church. So my hope is that over the next year or two, we'll see the rise of or the coming of entheogenic churches to Arkansas, where people can have psychedelic experiences in a safe, supported setting with a group. I think that could really expand psychedelic therapy to make it not just accessible to the very wealthy, but the general population that needs healing here. So that's where I'm hoping we'll see the future shift in Arkansas.
I think like one of the biggest things that I did learn from psychedelics was empathy. I didn't. That's not something which I've learned is you are not innately born with empathy, like it's taught. And we have as a human, we have the capacity to have empathy, but if it's not instilled early on, it's hard to fully grasp it. And I'm someone who definitely lacked that teaching growing up, and it really affected me in my early 20s with friends and people, and just thinking that I, you know, just not even really knowing what that word truly meant. And I do feel like, especially in the South and Southern states, conservative areas, that having the opportunity to have a safe space to experience psychedelics, to be able to teach you empathy would be very beneficial, especially with everything that's going on in those communities and stuff. So yeah, I think that I'm very hopeful that that will be the case for those areas too.
Yeah, it's a great side effect. It's a great side effect of working on your own pain and healing. That if we're able to really turn towards, sit with, and have compassion for our own pain, our own experiences of trauma and suffering, I believe that it increases our capacity to recognize suffering in others and to hold space and compassion for them as well. So, I don't want to get labeled as a hippie like Ram Dass, but I do believe that healing oneself is the first step we can take towards developing compassion and empathy for others.
Yeah. Gosh, sorry for the siren, but but yeah. Well, damn.
I think this was everything we wanted to know and more.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on and answering these questions for us and for being willing to do so.
This was really helpful to
Yeah.
us and like our community.
Yeah, people don't know that
Well,
this
I'm-
is a thing, I don't think. So,
I'm really grateful for the opportunity to get to talk to you both. And I'm interested, what are the products that you have on your table?
Oh, cute. This is Jimbo and Jules. It's like a holistic, sustainable, mostly CBD hemp company. Yeah.
Love
it's like
it.
a full spectrum hemp company, and we love their products.
I am a big fan of CBD. I used it for about a year and a half to deal with some chronic pain issues and haven't ever really found anything else that has been as effective as CBD. And it's also really great for use within the context of psychedelic therapy for people who are getting overwhelmed by distress. CBD can act as a sort of fast acting relief to give them a little bit more grounding and safety.
oh wow, yeah, we interviewed the creator of
The
this,
founder, yeah.
the founder, and he healed himself. He healed his Lyme disease through bee sting therapy and CBD, and his story is incredible. So you might actually really enjoy that episode. So
Thank you.
oh, you're gonna do it right now. But actually, before
Healing
we
is
start
happening.
wrapping things up, we do want to ask you 3 questions that have nothing to do with this interview at all. So,
Great. I'm ready.
Lacey, you want to go?
What is your favorite way to cook or eat a potato?
Ooh, I like to wrap it in foil and put it on the hot coals of a campfire.
Wow.
Damn, that was very specific.
I want to do that.
Yeah, wow. Damn, that was the first time someone said that.
Yeah, I know. Do one.
And then if you could be a gold medalist at any Olympic sport, summer or winter, which one would you pick?
Ooh, there's so many Olympic sports. Let's see. I've always thought that the luge was really cool, where they
what?
like get to the luge, where they get to like
Oh.
skate on ice and like shoot down a tunnel. To me, a lot of psychedelic experiences kind of feel like being on a luge, like being rocketed through a tunnel. So I feel like maybe I would already have some experience with that.
Never heard of that one
Yeah,
either.
Jesus. Okay.
And would you rather trip on psychedelics in the desert or smoke weed on the beach?
Oh, having done both, I would say that the desert is my spiritual home.
Yay. Us too, yeah. Well, dang, thank you for coming on and educating us and so many other people about this. Where can people find you as far as like social media or what is your clinic called? Like, how can they get in touch with you if they want to do
so
this?
at empath.guide is both my Instagram handle and my website. So you can go to empath.guide, GUIDE, and find me online. I'll be posting updates on potential trainings. Also, if people are interested in engaging in therapy, psychedelic or otherwise, they can contact me through that website.
Okay.
Empath.guide.
I'm going to leave some of you have a lot of articles written about you and like profiles. I'm going to leave them linked down below as well.
Yeah.
Thank you. Please.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay, guys. On that note, thank you if you've made it this far. Thank you for listening. And yeah, if you're in Arkansas and you want to broaden your mind and switch some stuff up in your
Heal a
life,
little bit.
this is great. So, but yeah, I guess What?
If you want to keep up with us, everything will be linked down below, as well as all of the Jimbo and Jules information. We do have a 20% off code if you want to check that out. But I guess on that note, we will see you in the next episode.
Yeah, and thank you again for coming on, Reed.
Wish you well. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.